The klaxon screamed through the training hall before I even had time to set my feet, and Instructor Vex Thalarin's voice cut through the noise like a blade through fog. Simulated hull breach. Simulated hostiles inbound. 30 seconds before the drones activate. Grab anything to defend yourselves. My heart slammed once, hard, and then something older than fear took over. I did not think. I moved. I need you to understand what this drill actually was before I tell you what happened inside it. This was not a real emergency. It was a joke. A rite of passage every new species in the Coalition training program was forced to sit through once, usually within their first month aboard the station. They dumped you into a storage bay stacked with junk, screamed at you to defend yourself, and then 2 training drones with padded strike arms would swat you around for 2 minutes while the instructors laughed from the observation deck. Every cadet before me had understood the joke immediately. The Doran cadets picked up pipes and waved them like flags. The Kesu twins had hidden behind a supply crate and screamed until the timer ran out. Instructor Thalarin had watched this exact humiliation happen more than 400 times, and by his own admission later, he expected nothing different from me. He had never trained a human before. Nobody had explained to him that when you tell a human being to grab anything to defend themselves, you are not describing an exercise, you are describing a bloodline. My species spent hundreds of thousands of years being hunted by things with better claws, better night vision, and better teeth than us. We did not survive because we were the strongest animal in the room. We survived because we were the only animal that looked at a sharp rock and thought, this could be a knife, and then looked at that same rock a second time and thought, this could also be a hammer, and a doorstop, and a paperweight, and something I throw very hard at whatever is chasing me. I hit the first supply crate at a dead sprint. The lid came off in my hands, and inside was a coil of maintenance cable, thick and flexible. I wrapped it twice around my knuckles before my mind had even finished the thought weapon. Instant reach, instant wait. I moved to the next crate without stopping, because stopping is how you die, and found a fire extinguisher bolted to the wall behind it. I unclipped it in one motion. A fire extinguisher is not just a fire extinguisher. It is a blunt striking tool, a face full of blinding foam if you need distance, and a very solid piece of metal if you need something that will not bend. 10 seconds gone. Vex Thalarin had not even turned around yet. He was still watching the Doran cadets wave their pipes like they were greeting a parade. I found a support strut leaning against the far wall, snapped off from some long-dead piece of equipment. I stepped on the middle of it, out of instinct, and it cracked cleanly at about 40 centimeters, and the broken edge caught the light in a way that made my whole body relax slightly, because now I had reach and a point. A spear. My grandmother used to tell me that our ancestors invented the spear so many separate times across so many separate corners of the world that some scientists believe it might be less something we invented and more something we remembered. I did not have time to think about that in the moment. I only had time to feel it settle into my grip like it belonged there. 15 seconds. I found a spool of packing tape sitting on a shelf, and my hands were already working before my brain caught up, binding 3 loose bolts to the end of the maintenance cable, turning it into a flail with a weighted head. I do not fully remember deciding to do this. It simply happened, the way breathing happens. 20 seconds. 2 screwdrivers sat on a workbench, and I slid them into my belt like sheathed knives without breaking stride. A stack of metal lids, meant for storage bins, caught my eye next, and I grabbed the widest one and held it against my forearm. A shield, light enough to carry, solid enough to block a strike, and if I needed it, I could throw it edge first like a discus. 25 seconds. I was standing in the center of the training bay holding a spear in one hand and a bolt flail in the other, a shield strapped to my forearm, a fire extinguisher tucked under one arm, 2 screwdrivers at my belt, and a coil of spare cable looped over my shoulder in case I needed to trip something later. I remember scanning the room for anything I might have missed. I remember thinking there might still be time for one more thing. That was when Instructor Thalarin finally turned around. I was told afterward, by cadets who watched it happen because I genuinely did not notice at the time, that all 4 of his eye stalks did 4 completely different things at once. 2 of them locked onto me and did not move. One of them twitched violently, the Coalition equivalent of a blink of disbelief. The 4th one simply drooped, pointing down at the floor, as though giving up on processing what it was seeing. "Cadet," he said, and his voice had lost every trace of the bored, routine tone he had walked in with. The drill parameter was one weapon. "You said grab anything," I told him. I did not hear a limit in that sentence. I heard a resource cap, not a resource restriction. He opened his mouth to respond, and that was exactly when the timer ran out, and the training drones dropped from their overhead rack. There were 3 of them, fast little machines built to swarm, coordinated by a shared targeting system, tipped with padded strike arms, designed to tag a cadet without causing real harm. In the entire history of this drill, no cadet had lasted more than 10 seconds against them. They moved too fast, struck from too many angles at once, and most trainees simply had not built the instinct yet to treat a threat like a puzzle instead of a wall of noise. The first drone launched itself toward my head, targeting sensor glowing along its front edge. I did not wait for it to arrive. I threw the shield. It was not a wild throw. I had already measured the arc in my head the moment I picked the lid up off the shelf, the same way I had measured the arc of every stone I had ever skipped across a lake as a child. The shield caught the drone directly across its sensor housing, and the little machine spun off course, blinded, whining, as it tried and failed to reacquire a target. The second drone came in low, aiming for my legs. I let it get close. I want to be honest about how strange that decision looked from the observation deck, because several of the instructors later told me their first thought was that I had frozen. That fear had locked my knees in place. It had not. I was waiting for exactly the right distance, the same patience my ancestors needed when they hunted animals faster than themselves, and had learned that speed was not always the answer. Timing was. When the drone reached striking range, I swept the bolt flail low and let its own weight do the work, catching the drone's stabilizer fin and yanking it sideways with a motion that used almost none of my own strength. The drone spun out of control and collided directly with the third drone, which had been circling around to flank me from behind. The 2 machines tangled together in a mess of spinning limbs and confused targeting protocols. I finished it with the spear, driving the broken edge of the strut cleanly into the housing of both tangled drones at once, and the training bay fell silent, except for the dying whir of motors powering down. 11 seconds. That was the total time from grab anything, to defend yourselves, to all 3 drones neutralized. I checked afterward because I did not believe it myself until I watched the footage. 11 seconds, and I still had 19 seconds of the original 30-second window left over, which the recording shows me spending, by calmly repositioning the fire extinguisher under my arm in case reinforcements arrived. There were no reinforcements. There had never been any planned. This was supposed to be the easy drill, the funny one, the one every species laughed about afterward over a meal in the mess hall. Instructor Thalarin did not say anything for a long moment. The silence stretched out so far that a few of the other cadets started glancing between him and me, unsure whether they were allowed to breathe yet. Finally he spoke, and his voice had gone quiet in a way I had not heard from him before. "Cadet," he said, "in the entire history of your species, has anyone ever handed your people a truly empty room?" "No, sir," I answered honestly. "There has always been something, a rock, a bone, a piece of wood. If nothing else, there has usually been a very disappointed relative standing nearby, ready to hand you something sharp and tell you to hurry up." He stared at me a while longer, and then he pulled out his data slate and began speaking softly into it, more to himself than to me. "Revise curriculum. Remove humans from introductory drills. Move humans directly to advanced defensive scenarios. Flag this cadet's file for command review." I heard later that 3 other instructors up in the observation gallery spent the rest of that afternoon arguing over who was going to write the incident report, explaining how a drill designed purely for comic relief had ended with 0 functioning training drones, 1 fully armed cadet, and absolutely no injuries anywhere except to the station's remaining drone budget. I kept the screwdrivers. Nobody ever asked for them back. Word of what happened spread through the training station faster than any official report could move. By the next morning, cadets from 4 other squads had found excuses to walk past our training hall just to look at me, the way you might look at an animal in a habitat that was not behaving the way the enclosure sign promised. A Doran cadet named Kessa approached me at breakfast and asked, very seriously, whether every human treated an empty room as a personal challenge. I told her that was probably not far from the truth, and she went quiet and simply stared at her food for a while. Instructor Thalarin requested a private meeting with me 2 days later. I expected some kind of disciplinary conversation, since technically, I had ignored the stated parameter of the drill and used far more than one weapon. Instead, when I arrived at his office, he had a display open showing footage from the drill, paused at the exact moment I threw the shield. "Sit," he said, and I sat. He did not speak right away. He simply studied the frozen image for a while, the shield captured mid-flight, my body already turning toward the second drone, before the first had even finished spinning away. Then he asked me something I did not expect. How many of those tools did you actually plan to use before the drones dropped? All of them, I told him. Eventually, I was still looking for more when the timer ran out. He made a sound I had come to recognize as the coalition equivalent of a long exhale. "Cadet," he said, "do you understand why this drill exists?" I told him I assumed it was meant to test improvisation under pressure. "Partly," he said. "But mostly, it exists to teach humility. Every species that walks through that door for the first time believes they understand danger, and every species that walks through that door leaves understanding how little control they actually have when threatened without warning. It has never once failed to teach that lesson. Until you." I did not know how to respond to that, so I said nothing, and he continued. "You did not appear afraid in that recording. You appeared to be running a checklist." "That is because I was," I admitted. "Cable, extinguisher, strut, tape, bolts, screwdrivers, lids. My mind moves through available resources the way some species might recite a countdown. It is not bravery. It is closer to a reflex passed down so many times it no longer feels like a choice." He leaned back and studied me for a long moment, with all 4 eye stalks focused directly on my face, which I had learned by then was his version of complete and undivided attention. "I would like your permission," he said slowly, "to submit this footage to command as a case study. Not as a joke this time. As a serious example of adaptive threat response." I told him he could use it however he thought would help, and he thanked me in a tone that sounded almost uncertain, as though he was still deciding whether thanking a human for turning a comedy drill into a genuine tactical demonstration was the correct response or a strange one. 3 weeks later, the training program changed. New cadets from every species still went through the original joke drill exactly as before. Pipes waved like flags, twins hiding behind crates, instructors laughing from the gallery. But human cadets were quietly redirected to a separate room entirely, one stocked with far less clutter and far more careful supervision, because Command had apparently decided that giving an unsupervised human access to a room full of loose objects and a stated threat was, in their exact wording, according to a document I was later shown, an unnecessary escalation of an already unpredictable variable. I found that description strangely flattering. The story followed me for the rest of my time on the station. New arrivals would ask about it within their first week, usually phrased the same way each time. "Is it true you built 6 weapons in under 30 seconds? And I would always correct them, because accuracy matters. It was not 6. It was 5 weapons and 1 shield and 1 length of cable meant for tripping anyone who somehow got past everything else. People tend to round up when they tell a story enough times, and I preferred to keep the details honest, because the truth was strange enough without needing exaggeration. Instructor Thalarin and I ended up working together for the rest of that training cycle, and somewhere along the way his caution around me softened into something closer to genuine curiosity. He asked me once, during a quiet evening shift, why humans seemed to treat ordinary objects as potential tools so instinctively, and I tried to explain it the way my grandmother had once explained it to me. She used to say that our species survived not because we were strong and not because we were fast, but because we were the only creature on our world that looked at literally anything, a bone, a rock, a stick, a piece of scrap metal, and asked the same 2 questions every single time. What can this become, and how quickly can I make it become that? He sat with that answer for a long while, before finally saying that he found it both reassuring and deeply unsettling that the same instinct could produce both a farmer's tool and a weapon, depending entirely on the need of the moment. "That is exactly it," I told him. "We are not naturally violent. We are naturally resourceful. It only becomes dangerous when the resourcefulness meets a threat, and on that day, in that training bay, it met one." He nodded slowly, the way I imagine he had nodded at very few conclusions in his long career, and told me that he intended to keep the recording of that drill on file permanently, not as a warning to future instructors, but as a reminder to himself. "A reminder of what?" I asked. "That the universe is full of species who look at a room and see the walls," he said. "And then there are the ones who look at the exact same room and see everything they could possibly need to survive it." I never forgot that conversation, and I do not think he did either. Years later, long after I had moved on from that training station to assignments far more serious than joke drills and rubber-tipped drones, I heard that the footage was still shown to new instructors during their own orientation, not as comedy anymore, but as the very first lesson they were given about working alongside humans. "Grab anything to defend yourself," the instructions still say, word for word, unchanged since the day I first heard them shouted across that training hall. They just make very sure now that everyone standing nearby understands exactly what that sentence means when a human is the one listening.